Have you ever sat in a room full of powerful people and realized every single one of them was applauding a lie? I did. I watched my life's work get praised, celebrated, and stamped with someone else's name, while I sat there silent, invisible, expendable. No shouting, no confrontation, just smiles, nods, approval, and one junior man leaning back in his chair like he just saved the world. At that moment, something inside me didn't break, it hardened. Because when people steal your work, they don't just take credit, they take your years, your nights, your patience, your dignity. And the truth is, I could have fought. I could have exposed him right there in that meeting. I could have burned the room down with facts. But I didn't. Instead, I chose something far more dangerous. I chose time. I chose silence. I chose to let them win. For now. Because the most devastating revenge doesn't announce itself. It waits. It watches. And when it finally arrives, it doesn't look like revenge at all. It looks like consequences. So tell me, if you were sitting where I was, watching your value being stolen in real time, would you speak up, or would you walk away and let them learn the cost of underestimating you?
I used to believe that if you kept your head down and did exceptional work, someone would eventually notice. That belief followed me for most of my career. It carried me through 23 years of failing plants, missed deadlines, and impossible turnarounds. I wasn't the loudest voice in the room. I wasn't the guy executives remembered at cocktail hours. I was the one they called when numbers didn't make sense and machines stopped breathing. My name is Michael Reynolds. I'm 47 years old, and for most of my life, I believed competence spoke for itself. Brighton Automotive Systems was supposed to be another short assignment, a struggling plant, declining margins, rising scrap rates, too many managers, not enough accountability. I'd seen it all before. When I walked through the factory for the first time, I noticed things others didn't, the subtle rhythm of machines, the way operators compensated for bad layouts without even realizing it, the quiet signals of a system bleeding money every minute it stayed unchanged. I didn't announce myself. I never did. I listened. I watched. I took notes. For 4 months, my life shrank down to that plant. Early mornings, late nights, cold coffee, spreadsheets that grew heavier every week. I mapped bottlenecks no one wanted to admit existed. I rebuilt maintenance schedules that had been patched together for years. I traced supplier failures back to contracts signed long before anyone in the room had arrived. Every night I told myself just one more calculation, one more scenario, one more risk model. Time mattered. This plant was weeks away from shutdown, hundreds of jobs on the line, reputations too, including mine. That's when Oliver Grant entered the picture. Oliver was younger, early 30s, polished, MBA confidence. He spoke in clean sentences and smiled at the right moments. Management liked him instantly. I didn't dislike him at first. I trained him, shared my process, walked him through my models line by line. He asked the right questions, took notes, nodded a lot. I assumed he understood the unspoken rule. Credit flows back to the source. Looking back now, that assumption feels naive. As the weeks passed, the pressure intensified. Emails marked urgent, executives flying in, plant director Emma Collins walking the floor with a clipboard asking for answers that didn't yet exist. I felt the clock ticking, not loudly, quietly, like a second hand moving when no one is watching. I finished the turnaround strategy 2 nights before the executive review. It was airtight. Cost reductions, workflow redesign, maintenance recovery, supplier accountability, a step-by-step implementation plan that could pull the plant back from the edge. I sent the final deck to Oliver at 1:14 a.m. He replied at 1:16. "Looks great. I'll walk them through it." That sentence stayed with me. The executive meeting took place in the main conference room. Long table, glass walls. 12 people who could end careers with a single sentence. I took my usual seat along the side, notebook open, pen ready. Habit. Oliver stood at the head of the table, calm, comfortable, too comfortable. He spoke smoothly, slide after slide, my models, my numbers, my conclusions, delivered with confidence, as if they'd been living in his head all along. I waited for him to say it. Just once, this was Michael's work, or even my team and I. But the moment never came. Emma Collins leaned forward near the end. She smiled, the kind of smile that decides futures. "Outstanding vision, Oliver," she said. "You just saved this plant." Applause followed, soft at first, then stronger, heads nodding, approval rippling across the table. I didn't move. Oliver leaned back in his chair, relaxed, grateful. Not once did he look at me. Not once did he say my name. I felt something settle in my chest. Not anger, not shock, clarity. In that moment, I understood something I'd ignored my entire career. Silence isn't humility. Sometimes it's permission. The meeting moved on. Next agenda item. Weekend plans. Laughter. I closed my notebook. As people stood and stretched, I unclipped my company badge. The plastic felt lighter than it should have been. I placed it on the table, slowly, deliberately. "I'm done here," I said, effective immediately. No shouting, no accusations. Emma called after me, said I was overreacting, that we could talk this through. I didn't turn around. I walked past the production lines I knew better than anyone else, past machines I'd memorized in failure and recovery, out the door. Outside, the air felt different, sharper, honest. That was the day I stopped believing recognition was automatic, and that was the moment a different kind of plan began forming, one that didn't involve shouting, exposure, or emotional revenge. Just time. Because when you walk away with your value intact, the realization always comes later. The only question is, who feels it first? If you were me, would you have fought in that room, or would you have walked away knowing something far bigger was already in motion?
The first night after I walked out of Brighton Automotive Systems, I didn't sleep. Not because I was angry, not because I was afraid, but because my mind wouldn't stop replaying the small details everyone else missed. The way Oliver's voice never wavered, the way Emma nodded before the applause even started, the way the room moved on as if 23 years of my experience were interchangeable with a clean suit and a confident tone. At 3 in the morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of coffee I didn't need and opened my laptop. Old habit, muscle memory. I wasn't looking for validation. I wasn't drafting emails. I was reviewing something else entirely. Every system, every dependency, every fragile assumption holding that plant together. People think quitting is emotional, dramatic, loud. For me, it was surgical. I knew exactly what I'd left behind. Not secrets, not sabotage, just knowledge. The kind that lives in your head after years of pattern recognition. The kind you don't even realize you're using until it's gone. By sunrise, my phone started buzzing. First, a message from HR, neutral tone. "We'd like to discuss your decision." Then one from Oliver, casual, almost friendly. "Hey Michael, hope you're okay. Big day yesterday. Let's catch up." I didn't reply. Time has a strange way of slowing down when other people start panicking. I spent that morning doing something I hadn't done in months. Walking. No spreadsheets, no calls, just movement. Every step felt like space opening up in my head. By noon, I knew something had shifted. A former maintenance supervisor texted me quietly. "They're asking questions already." Another message followed. "Your maintenance recovery schedule, no one can explain it." I smiled. Not because they were struggling, but because struggle reveals truth faster than success ever does. Oliver had the deck. He had the praise. What he didn't have was the instinct, the judgment calls, the unspoken reasons behind every decision. He knew what to say, not why it worked. Brighton's turnaround plan wasn't a checklist. It was a living thing, adjusted daily, balanced on timing. And timing, once disrupted, doesn't announce itself. It just drifts, then snaps. 3 days later, Emma called. Her voice was calm, professional, the same tone she'd used when she said I was overreacting. "We're running into some execution challenges," she said. "Nothing major, but we'd like your insight." Insight, not credit, not apology. I told her I'd think about it. That night, I pulled out my old notebooks, handwritten notes from the first weeks inside the plant, red flags I'd circled, warnings I'd softened for executives who didn't like bad news. I realized something uncomfortable. I'd protected them from the truth, from responsibility, from the cost of ignoring people like me. And now, without me there, reality had started pressing back. A supplier missed a delivery window. Maintenance overcorrected a schedule. A bottleneck I'd manually balanced began to choke production. Nothing catastrophic, not yet, but pressure was building, quietly. Oliver sent another message, shorter this time. "Can we talk?" I didn't reply. This wasn't revenge in the way movies sell it. There was no dramatic reveal, no confrontation, just absence. And absence is powerful when someone depended on you more than they admitted. I thought about walking back in, negotiating, asking for my due, but then I remembered the applause, the smile, the way my name never crossed Oliver's lips. No, this wasn't about going back. This was about letting the system experience life without me. By the end of the week, rumors reached me through people who trusted me enough to speak quietly. Executives asking why projections weren't lining up. Emma growing impatient. Oliver staying late trying to reverse engineer decisions he'd never truly understood. Time was ticking again, but this time, not for me. I felt calm, clear, detached. Because here's the truth no one tells you about corporate betrayal. The moment you leave, the countdown starts. Not to your failure, but to their realization. The only unknown is how long it takes before they admit it. And when that admission finally comes, will they be asking for help or forgiveness?
By the second week, the calls stopped sounding confident. It always happens that way. At first, they tell themselves everything is under control. Then they start asking questions they should already know the answers to. And finally, they start calling the people they pretended they didn't need. I could hear it in Emma's voice when she called again. A fraction slower, a fraction tighter. "We're seeing inconsistencies," she said. "Nothing alarming, just unexpected." Unexpected. That word made me pause, because nothing that was happening inside that plant was unexpected to me. I'd written scenarios for it, built buffers around it, left notes explaining why certain shortcuts would collapse under pressure, notes Oliver had skimmed, not absorbed. I told Emma the truth, carefully, calmly. "I don't work there anymore." Silence stretched across the line. "I know," she said, "but your familiarity with the systems." "My familiarity," I repeated, not sharply, just clearly, "was never the issue." Another pause, longer this time. After the call ended, I sat back and stared at the wall. Not angry, not satisfied, just aware. There's a moment in every conflict where the power quietly changes hands. No announcement, no applause, just a shift. That shift had already happened. Meanwhile, Oliver was unraveling. I didn't hear from him directly. I heard it from the people beneath him. Operators, engineers, supervisors who'd worked with me long enough to know the difference between confidence and competence. "He keeps asking why we did it that way," one of them told me. "Did he change the supplier rotation?" another asked. "He's moving things that shouldn't be moved." Each message confirmed what I already knew. Oliver was trying to run a machine by reading the instruction manual, not by listening to the sound it made when something was wrong. Brighton's systems had personality, history, trauma. You couldn't just rearrange them and expect obedience. At night, I thought about intervening, just once, a quiet suggestion, a single correction. It would have been easy, and part of me wanted to. Old instincts die hard. But then I remembered the meeting room, the way my absence hadn't mattered, the way my presence had been optional. So I stayed silent. Silence does strange things to people who are used to applause.
It makes them doubt themselves. It forces them to confront the gap between what they present and what they actually know. By midweek, the pressure became visible. A delayed shipment triggered overtime. Overtime inflated costs. Costs triggered executive emails. Executive emails triggered panic, and panic leads to decisions made too fast with too little understanding. Oliver called me that Friday night. I watched the phone ring, let it stop, watched it ring again. On the third call, I answered. "Michael," he said, exhaling like he'd been holding his breath for days, "I could really use your perspective." Perspective. Not credit, not apology. "What's wrong?" I asked. He hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. The numbers aren't lining up. The plan should be working. Should be. The plan was built around constraints. Did you change any of them? Another pause. Some, he admitted, just to optimize. I closed my eyes. Optimization without understanding is destruction with a smile. "I can't help you," I said. "Because you're angry?" he asked. "No," I said, "because you didn't listen when it mattered." He tried again, softer. "This is bigger than us. This was always bigger than us. That's why credit mattered." I hung up before he could respond. After that call, something settled inside me. Not relief, acceptance. Revenge isn't about watching someone fail. It's about watching truth surface on its own, without your fingerprints on it. The following Monday, Emma requested a formal meeting. Not a call, a meeting. I declined. I could feel the walls closing in on them, production targets slipping, executive patience thinning, the narrative shifting from brilliant turnaround to execution challenges. And still, no one said my name. That was the most revealing part. Even as the structure I'd built began to crack without me, admitting my value meant admitting their mistake, and pride is expensive when deadlines are tight. I wondered how long they could hold that line, because eventually every system reaches a breaking point, not at once, piece by piece, until someone has to ask the question they've been avoiding since the beginning. And when that question finally comes, will they ask it honestly, or will they still be trying to save face while everything around them quietly falls apart?
The breaking point never arrives with noise. It arrives with paperwork. I learned that years ago, watching companies collapse not from explosions, but from emails that stopped being polite, from calendar invites marked mandatory, from phrases like alignment review and external audit readiness. When those words start circulating, it means someone above you has stopped believing the story they were told. At Brighton, that shift happened quietly on a Tuesday. I knew because 3 different people reached out to me within the same hour. Not managers, not executives, the ones who actually kept the place running. Their messages weren't dramatic, just confused. They changed the maintenance cycle again. They moved the buffer stock you warned about. Production's backing up in Zone C. Each message was a tremor, small, contained, but together they formed a pattern. The system was no longer compensating for bad decisions. It was exposing them. Emma called that afternoon. Her tone was different now. No authority, no dismissal, just controlled urgency. "We need to talk," she said. I agreed to meet her, not at the plant, not at corporate, neutral ground, a quiet cafe halfway between us, somewhere without titles. She arrived early. That alone told me everything. For the first time since I'd known her, Emma Collins looked tired, not overworked, cornered. Her confidence was still there, but it had lost its shine. "We underestimated the complexity," she said after a few minutes. I didn't respond. "And," she continued, choosing her words carefully, "we may have underestimated you." There it was. Not an apology, a concession. She slid a folder across the table. Printouts, charts, deviations, missed targets, all symptoms, none of them the disease. "The board is concerned," she said. "They're asking how a plan that looked so strong on paper is unraveling." I looked at the folder, then back at her. "Is Oliver still presenting it?" I asked. She hesitated. That hesitation was answer enough. "He's struggling to explain certain decisions." Struggling. The word followed Oliver everywhere now. Emma leaned forward. "We'd like you to come back as a consultant. Short term, discreet." Discreet. So that was the plan. Use my mind, keep my name quiet, fix the mess without disturbing the narrative. I took a breath, slow, measured. No, I said. Her eyes widened slightly, not anger, surprise. People like Emma aren't used to clean refusals. We're offering flexibility, compensation, authority. You're offering access without acknowledgement. That's not flexibility, that's convenience. Silence sat between us. Outside, people walked past the window, unaware that inside, a story was collapsing under its own weight. I didn't leave because I wasn't valued. I left because I was invisible. Emma looked down at the folder, then back at me. If this plant fails, a lot of people will pay the price. That line landed because it was true, and she knew I knew it. I stood up. Then you should fix the problem, not the symptoms. I left before she could respond. That night, I slept better than I had in months. Not because I felt victorious, but because I felt aligned. For the first time in years, my actions matched my self-respect. Inside Brighton, things accelerated. An external consultant was brought in, then another. Meetings multiplied, PowerPoint decks stacked up like sandbags against a rising flood. Oliver stopped replying to messages, then stopped being mentioned at all. People don't disappear suddenly in corporations. They fade, first from meetings, then from decisions, then from memory. I heard he'd started questioning himself, second-guessing every call, confidence eroding under scrutiny he wasn't built to withstand. And still, no one publicly connected the dots back to me. That was the most fascinating part. They were willing to accept inefficiency, delays, cost overruns, but admitting they'd misjudged the source of value, that was harder. Because once you say someone mattered, you have to explain why you let them walk out. Weeks passed. Then one morning my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I answered. "This is the board," the voice said. "We'd like to have a conversation." Not Emma, not Oliver. The board. I looked out the window. The sky was clear, calm, deceptive. I realized then that the quiet phase was over. The absence had done its work. The system had spoken. Now came the part where truth demanded a seat at the table. The only question left was simple and dangerous at the same time. When they finally ask me to step back in, will they be ready to hear the truth, or will they still be trying to protect the lie that started all of this? The first board meeting call took me by surprise. Not because they wanted to talk, but because the tone was different. No introductions, no small talk. Just a quiet, urgent sense of pressure I hadn't heard before. When I walked into the boardroom, I realized how much had changed in just a few weeks. The air was heavier. The executives were no longer nodding confidently. Their body language was tight, deliberate. Each glance, each hesitation screamed uncertainty. Oliver sat at the far end, fidgeting with a pen. His composure was gone. Carefully built confidence crumbling under scrutiny he hadn't anticipated. Emma was there too, still trying to appear in control, but her eyes betrayed her. She knew I held all the answers, and now they needed me more than ever. They started with polite questions about timelines, budgets, projections. Then, as if testing the waters, they asked, "How did you anticipate the bottlenecks in Zone C?" I smiled faintly, a slow, deliberate smile, the kind that comes after years of knowing more than anyone else in the room. "You didn't anticipate them," I said calmly, "because the system wasn't designed to fail gracefully without me." A pause. You could feel the board collectively holding their breath. The silence was satisfying, the kind of silence that forces people to reflect on what they ignored for too long. Oliver tried to speak, to fill the vacuum with words, but his explanations faltered. Charts he once delivered confidently now felt hollow. He was repeating my conclusions, not understanding them. Every slide, every phrase exposed the cracks in his preparation. I could see the realization spreading, slowly, painfully. They understood now exactly what they had lost. And for some of them, the truth hurt more than failure itself. They had applauded someone else's work and overlooked its true creator. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. That wasn't necessary. The room itself was doing the work of exposure, subtle, relentless. I simply let the facts speak. my calmness contrasting with their rising tension. Emma finally looked at me, hesitation in her expression. "We miscalculated the impact of your departure," she admitted. Not a full apology, not yet, but it was there. The recognition I had been denied for months, condensed into 4 carefully measured words. I leaned back. My plan, the one that had started quietly when I walked out, was unfolding exactly as intended. Revenge doesn't have to be dramatic. Sometimes it's the slow erosion of assumptions, the quiet unveiling of truth, the realization that absence, when wielded carefully, can be far more damaging than confrontation. Oliver looked at me, his confident smile gone. I could see the panic building, the questions he hadn't prepared answers for. The tables had turned. Every decision I had made, every calculation, every contingency plan had left an imprint too intricate for him to replicate, and now they were watching him flounder. The board needed answers, not excuses, not empty presentations. They needed me, and for the first time, their reliance on me became undeniable. I realized then the full power of what I had done. I had walked away. I had protected my dignity. I had refused to participate in a system that rewarded theft of credit, and in return, the universe, corporate or otherwise, was balancing itself, quietly, with precision. After the meeting, I left the building again. This time, I didn't need to feel the same calm I had felt before, because the recognition had arrived indirectly. The consequences of their choices were clear. Oliver understood, Emma understood, and I had achieved something far greater than applause. I didn't take my name back publicly. I didn't demand acknowledgement. My revenge had always been subtle, strategic, perfectly quiet, and the realization of my value was finally sinking in, unspoken, unavoidable, and lasting. Walking to my car, I thought about the lessons embedded in all of this. Power is not always about presence. Credit is not always about voice. Revenge is not always loud. And sometimes the most effective strategy is simply walking away, letting the world discover exactly what it lost, and watching them wrestle with it, quietly, painfully, in their own time. But even in victory, a question lingered in my mind, because life rarely delivers perfect closure. How far would someone go to reclaim what they once took for granted? And when that moment comes, would they be ready to face the truth, or would they try to hide it all over again? Weeks passed after the boardroom meeting, and Brighton Automotive Systems was slowly learning a painful lesson. Every metric I'd designed, every workflow I'd rebuilt, every safeguard I'd put in place began to show its absence. The plant was operating, yes, but it was fragile. One misstep, one misread number, and it all could unravel. And they knew it. Everyone knew it. Oliver had stopped sending messages. I heard about him through whispers from operators and supervisors who'd remained loyal enough to report quietly. He was overthinking every decision, second-guessing himself, avoiding bold calls. Where he had once exuded confidence, now hesitation followed him like a shadow. He was beginning to understand what I had known all along. Knowledge without understanding is worthless. Emma finally reached out again. This time it wasn't polite, it wasn't cautious, it was almost desperate. "Michael, we need your guidance," she said. There was no preamble, no excuses, just the urgency of survival. I listened. I didn't respond immediately. I let her words hang in the air. The subtle shift was intoxicating. This wasn't a victory for ego, it was the embodiment of principle. Integrity and competence, denied once, now commanded attention without me saying a word. Discreetly, she added, as if reminding herself not to ruin appearances. Discreet. I chuckled softly. The irony wasn't lost on me. They wanted the benefit of my work without acknowledging the source. But I didn't need validation anymore. The lesson was being learned, slowly, painfully, and perfectly. I agreed to provide limited consultation, enough to prevent catastrophic failure, enough to ensure the plant survived. But I controlled the terms. Every call, every suggestion, every insight was my choice. The power had shifted entirely. I had walked away, and they had run straight into the consequences of underestimating me.
During our conversations, I noticed a pattern. The more Oliver tried to assert himself, the more mistakes became obvious. Every action he took was scrutinized not only by me, but by the system itself. My absence amplified every gap in his knowledge. He was learning the hard way, the very way I had warned, quietly, months earlier. It was fascinating to watch. I had spent years observing human behavior in corporate structures, noting patterns of pride, greed, and ego. Now I saw them in action, unraveling from a distance, and the realization that no one could replicate true mastery, no matter how polished, was deeply satisfying. The final confrontation wasn't dramatic. There was no shouting, no public exposure, just quiet acknowledgement, almost imperceptible. The board began to ask questions they had ignored before. Emma stopped deflecting. Oliver's confidence continued to erode. Slowly, inexorably, the truth emerged. I was the architect of the turnaround. My absence made that clear without me ever raising my voice. I had achieved what I wanted from the start, not revenge in the classical sense, not vindication through confrontation. My revenge had been silent, calculated, invisible. By leaving, I forced them to recognize the cost of underestimating me. By withholding, I allowed them to experience the consequences firsthand. Eventually, Brighton stabilized, but the lesson endured. Oliver learned to respect expertise. Emma learned that recognition cannot be postponed indefinitely, and the board learned that underestimating the quiet ones comes at a cost. I didn't return full-time. I didn't demand credit. I simply walked away once more, knowing my value was intact. And somewhere in the hallways of Brighton Automotive Systems, the understanding of that value, my value, lingered, unspoken, unavoidable, and unforgettable. As I drove away that day, the city lights reflecting off the hood of my car, I reflected on everything I had learned. The true power of silence, the subtle force of absence, and the quiet elegance of letting consequences teach lessons no lecture ever could. In the end, revenge isn't about the moment, it's about timing. It's about letting people discover, painfully and naturally, what they lost. And when that moment comes, the realization is far more permanent than applause. Because sometimes the most dangerous kind of revenge is invisible. And now, I wonder, if you were sitting where I was, watching someone take credit for your life's work, would you wait, like I did, to let truth unfold? Or would you step back in, breaking the silence before the lesson is fully learned? Which path would truly define you?